Hey everyone, welcome back to News and Views here on YouTube. I'm Derek, and we're diving into another deep dive today. You know how we do it here. We're going to be taking a closer look at some really fascinating stuff happening over in Syria. And I'm joined today by our expert, Samantha, who's really good at connecting the dots and explaining the why behind the headlines.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we've been digging into a bunch of news articles and reports about Syria, and it's a pretty wild story, right? Like, we're talking regime change,
Yeah.
led by an organization that, let's just say they have a bit of a colorful past. But before we get into all that crazy stuff, Samantha, let's make sure everyone's kind of on the same page here. For those who might not be totally up to speed, Syria is a country in the Middle East. If you were to hop on a plane from the U.S., it would take you about 12 hours to get there. So, Samantha, the big news is that after a decade of civil war, there's been a huge shift in power. Bashar al-Assad, Syria's longtime president, has fled the country.
Right. The rebel groups, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, they launched a really fast offensive and surprisingly successful. It's a major turning point after years of such a devastating conflict. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost, millions displaced, not to mention the international sanctions, which really crippled Syria's economy.
Yeah, wow. And it's pretty crazy to think that this group, HTS, is now in control of Syria.
Mm.
And what's even crazier, Samantha, is their history. Like, they used to be known as Jabhat al-Nusra. That was an al-Qaeda affiliate with serious roots in jihadist ideology. How did this happen?
Well, it is a remarkable transformation. Their leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, he started distancing himself from al-Qaeda back around 2016. And it finally culminated in a formal break.
So it sounds like they went through like a major rebranding, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. They've changed their name a number of times, trying to kind of get rid of that terrorist image,
Hmm.
project something a little more moderate. I mean, they even called themselves the Organization for the Liberation of the Levant at one point. Talk about a makeover, right?
It really makes you wonder, like, what their true motivations are. Are they really trying to change? Or is this all just some act to get power and legitimacy? Samantha, what's the international community think about all this?
Well, pretty much everyone is watching HTS's actions very closely. Some countries are cautiously optimistic. They're willing to wait and see if HTS actually keeps their promises to change. But others are pretty skeptical. They remember HTS's violent past and are worried about what this all means for the future of Syria.
Yeah, I get that. I read this story about an American journalist, Theo Padnos. He was captured and tortured by HTS back during the war. He was held captive for almost 2 years. And now he's saying he's actually seen some of his former captors, the people who tortured him, in positions of power in Damascus.
Right. It really just shows you the kind of brutality that HTS is capable of. And it makes those concerns about their human rights record even worse, especially when you think about how they treat religious minorities.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. So we've got this group with a really messed up past, and they are now in control of Syria. They're trying to change their image, but the world's not really buying it. And within Syria itself, there are people who are relieved that the war is over, but they're also terrified about what this new regime could mean. It's a story with so many twists and turns.
Absolutely.
And this is just the beginning. We're back, and yeah, we're really diving deep into this new era in Syria.
It's definitely a remarkable turn of events,
Hmm.
and it really raises so many questions about the future of not just Syria, but like the entire region. One of the things I think is really going to be important to watch is how HTS manages its internal affairs. They're not just dealing with external pressure.
Right.
They have to consolidate their power within Syria itself.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like they're walking a tightrope, right? They need to kind of keep the international community happy enough so those sanctions get lifted, but they also need to make sure they can hold on to power in Syria.
Are there groups within Syria that are like pushing back against HTS's leadership?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of skepticism,
Oh,
especially from people who actually fought alongside HTS against Assad.
oh wow.
They're wondering what this new Syria is going to look like. Will their voices be heard? And then on top of that, you've got these other factions. Some are still aligned with al-Qaeda, and they see HTS as traitors for breaking away. So, yeah, it's a very, very volatile situation.
Man, so they've got these internal struggles to deal with, and then you've got like this whole international chess game going on at the same time. You mentioned before that some countries are cautiously optimistic and others are just straight up skeptical. Can you give us like a rundown of who's leaning which way? Okay. Well, you've got the US, for example, and they're taking a very cautious approach. They're not rushing to lift those sanctions or recognize this new government, at least not yet. They want to see some real evidence that HTS has actually changed, not just like changing their name.
Yeah, right. What would that even look like? I mean, what would it take for the U.S. or, other countries that are skeptical to actually believe that HTS has changed for good?
Well, they need to actually do stuff, not just talk about it. They need to show they're really committed to human rights, protecting minorities, and creating a government that includes everyone. And I think the biggest thing is they have to address those concerns about ties to extremist groups. That's a deal breaker for a lot of countries.
I get that. But then you have these other countries like Turkey and Qatar who seem to be like, hey, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
They're calling for sanctions to be lifted. And Qatar even reopened its embassy in Damascus. Why are they doing that? What do they get out of all this?
Well, with Turkey, they've been supporting the Syrian opposition for a long time. And when they see Assad fall, they see that as a chance to protect their own interests in the region, especially when it comes to containing certain Kurdish groups that they consider a threat.
So for Turkey, it's all about strategic alliances and, making sure that they have power in the region. What about Qatar? What are they thinking?
Qatar seems to be taking a more, I guess you could say, practical approach. They probably want to rebuild those diplomatic ties and maybe have some influence over this new Syrian government. And then there's the economic aspect. Rebuilding Syria is going to take a ton of investment, and Qatar's in a good position to do that.
Wow. It's amazing how this one event has caused so many different reactions. You got countries trying to play it safe, others trying to take advantage, and just so much uncertainty in the air. But what about the people who actually live in Syria? What are they saying about all this? What are their hopes and fears as they try to deal with this new reality?
It's really a mix of things. A lot of Syrians are just relieved that the fighting has stopped, at least for now. They just want stability and a chance to rebuild their lives after a decade of just unimaginable suffering. But there's definitely anxiety, too, especially in Damascus, where people are worried about what life will be like under HTS. They're afraid of strict religious laws coming back and losing their freedoms.
It's just sad to think that after going through so much, they're now facing all this uncertainty. I keep thinking about that journalist, Theo Padnos, and how he saw his torturers in positions of power. That's got to be terrifying for the people who suffered under HTS in the past.
It really does make you think about all the terrible things that HTS has done, and it raises the question of whether anyone will be held responsible for all the atrocities that happened during the war. Will there be any effort to deal with the crimes committed by everyone involved? We don't know yet.
So we've talked about the struggles within Syria, the pressure from other countries, and the fears of the Syrian people. What's the bottom line? What can we expect to happen in the next few months and years? Will HTS actually be able to stay in control and create a government that works?
It's really too early to tell for sure. Will HTS be able to hold on to power and govern effectively? Or will we see more infighting and conflict? And how will the rest of the world react? Will they work with HTS or shut them out?
It really does feel like we're at a turning point. So many different things could happen. What's crazy is that even though the war is over, the fight for Syria's future is just starting.
I think that's a good way to put it.
We're back and wrapping up our deep dive here, looking at the situation in Syria. And, Samantha, we've talked about a lot of stuff.
We have.
But there's this one big question that we haven't really gotten into, and that's the whole issue of accountability.
Right.
After a decade of such brutal war, can there really be any healing? Can Syria actually have a peaceful future without dealing with all the terrible things that were done by everybody?
It's a huge question, and a complicated one. There are definitely people calling for justice, both inside Syria and from the international community. But actually getting accountability after a conflict like this is really, really difficult.
Why is that? Is it just that there's too much to try to sort out after so many years of fighting?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, the sheer number of atrocities that happened is staggering. And the Syrian civil war went on for over a decade. So gathering all that evidence, finding the people who are responsible, and then figuring out the legal stuff, it's a massive undertaking. And it's not just about figuring out what happened. It's about making sure that justice is served in a way that the Syrian people see as fair.
Right. And then there's the whole political side of things, too. With HTS in charge now, it doesn't seem likely that they're going to want to go after their own people for crimes they committed in the past.
Exactly. And even if they did, would people even trust them to be impartial? Especially the people who were victims of HTS. It's a tough situation to navigate. And then you've got countries like Turkey who might not want to push too hard for accountability. They want to stay on good terms with the new Syrian government.
So you've got all these competing interests and challenges, but what about the people who were hurt? The people who lost family members, who had to flee their homes, who went through so much pain. What does justice even mean for them? Is it even possible at this point?
That's really what it all comes down to. For a lot of Syrians, justice is going to be a long and difficult process. And for some, it might never really happen. It could involve things like truth and reconciliation commissions, or maybe reparations, or some kind of transitional justice system that tries to address the underlying causes of the conflict so that it doesn't happen again.
So maybe real justice is less about punishment and more about finding a way to heal and rebuild.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. It's about acknowledging the pain that people went through, honoring the victims, and then finding a way to move forward together, creating a society where these kinds of horrors won't happen again. It's a huge task, but it has to start somewhere.
And maybe that starts with recognizing that all Syrians deserve to be treated with dignity and respect.
Absolutely. It's going to take a lot of dialogue, empathy, and a willingness to confront the painful past. It won't be easy, and it's not going to happen quickly. But if Syria is going to have any chance of a peaceful future, this is essential.
Well, Samantha, you've given us a lot to think about today. The situation in Syria is still very uncertain, but you've also shown us how resilient the Syrian people are. And there's always hope for healing and rebuilding. It's going to be fascinating to see how things unfold over the next few years, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it.
Thanks so much for being here today, Samantha. It's been great having you. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to this deep dive. We really encourage you to keep learning about Syria and everything that's happening there. And don't forget to subscribe to News and Views for more analysis and discussions like this one. We'll see you next time.